Hey guys, okay, real quick rapid response to the Supreme Court ruling today dealing with abortion, Roe versus Wade. And I don't even really want to say ruling. Let me rephrase that. Opinion, right? So the court gives opinions. It's not a king or a queen. It doesn't give rulings, even though that's the way we tend to phrase it. But I think it's healthier to call it a court opinion because that's even what the court calls it. It's their opinion. So I already wrote an article about Roe versus Wade and the Constitution. And the way I look at all of these issues, regardless of my opinions and feelings about the specific topic, which, believe me, I have very strong opinions about abortion. I have very strong opinions about a lot of these topics. But they don't really matter. What matters is what the Constitution says. And that's really it, right? Because I don't want a government, and I assume most of you don't want a government that can do whatever it wants, which means it must stay within the confines of the Constitution, no matter how we feel or no matter what we want, right? That's the beauty of our republic, is that we have something that actually confines our government's power. It says, government, you can do X, Y, and Z and nothing else. And unless we, as the citizens, through our state legislatures, bequeath to our federal government more power through a constitutional amendment, it does not have a power that it does not have. So, long story short. So the Supreme Court today, this was a monumental day, and I don't mean that in terms of abortion itself. Now, a lot of people have very strong feelings about abortion, and I'm not saying that I don't, but what I mean is on a constitutional side of things, dealing with something called substantive due process, and the way that we understand the Constitution and the way that we understand liberty and the relationship between the federal government and the state governments. This was an incredibly monumental day, very encouraging in the sense that our court, the Supreme Court, which is bloated with power, actually lessened its own power with this ruling, right? So there's no law in the federal government that deals with abortion. There's no federal law that deals with abortion at all. So that means that every single law, every single thing that our federal government, I shouldn't say federal government, that our Supreme Court is dealing with when it comes to an issue like abortion has to do with state laws, right? That's it. And so the Supreme Court is technically only supposed to deal with the federal Constitution as applied to the federal government, since the federal Constitution, generally speaking, applies only to the federal government as the federal government's job description. However, with the 14th Amendment, and I could get into a whole lot of this, but I won't, the federal Constitution has been selectively incorporated to a lot of the states. In other words, now the state governments can violate the federal Constitution. And that basically means most of the Bill of Rights, more or less. It can't really violate, say, the enumerated powers of the Constitution, which specify what our federal government can or cannot make laws about. So if our federal government, if our state governments do something that the Supreme Court deems to be unconstitutional per the federal Constitution, the Supreme Court has taken the power to I shouldn't say eradicate or nullify, because technically they can't fully do that, but they can issue an opinion that would say that whatever laws the court deems are unconstitutional that the states have written, they should no longer be written or upheld as legitimate, right? So where am I going with this? Okay, so the interesting thing, though, about our government is not a government that gives rights. It doesn't enumerate rights. That's not what our Constitution does at all. So our Constitution doesn't enumerate rights. It enumerates powers to the federal government rather than rights to the people. The Bill of Rights was sort of an extra precaution, and it doesn't enumerate rights either. The Bill of Rights literally says such and such right shall not be infringed. So it never says, hey, citizens, you have this right. It literally says citizens already have these things as protected by the Constitution, but we're going to give an extra precaution by specifically saying the government cannot write laws about these specific topics. Anything else, right, not listed in these Bill of Rights, and anything that's not part of the federal government's job, which is in Article 1, Section 8, is left to the state governments with intention. There's no one size fits all, right? It's the beautiful, messy system of federalism. Every state's going to have to figure out some of these more complicated issues for themselves. The day-to-day governing was left to the states. So issues like murder, licensing, marriage, business regulation, all of these things were left to the state governments because, again, there's no one size fits all to any issue like that. And so these day-to-day governing issues were left to the states. Furthermore, if you give these types of issues a centralized form of power over them, tyranny is more likely. So the founders knew this, and they wanted to avoid this at all costs, right? So a lot of these more day-to-day issues were left to the states, okay, with intention. So an issue like abortion, which has never come up in federal law, technically, according to the Constitution, is left exclusively to the states, right? The states have to deal with this messy question. Whether they deal with it well or not, that's the whole messy system of federalism, right? And unless the states come together through an amendment to actually put abortion in the Constitution as something that our federal government can touch or deal with, it's not within the federal jurisdiction of power at all, Supreme Court or not, right? So Congress cannot write a law that legalizes abortion, nor can Congress write a law that criminalizes abortion. Congress has no power whatsoever over the issue of abortion. And neither does the Supreme Court. And this is where this case is so unique, and it's healthy for the Constitution in that it actually took power away from itself, which is a rare thing in government today, right? So the Supreme Court gave itself the power to declare that abortion, or many other litany of rights since the 14th Amendment and this idea of substantive due process, which I'm not going to get into all of that, but just understand the Supreme Court, since the 14th Amendment in the late 1800s, has been very fond of giving itself the power to define what types of rights are constitutional, whether or not they are in the Constitution or not, fully sort of warping the whole understanding of rights and liberty in the first place, which, again, our government does not give rights and our Constitution doesn't give rights. It protects liberty. So the court decided back in Roe versus Wade that they had the power to declare what a right was. That's arbitrary because it doesn't come from the Constitution. So if they can declare what a right is in this scenario, they can declare that for anything. And that gives the federal government the power to nullify laws at the state level, right? Growing federal power, giving the federal government an ability to strike down laws that states write. Right. So if they can do that in one case, this is arbitrary power for you, they can do it in any case. So what's to say that the federal government or the Supreme Court specifically, why can't they then say that, everyone has a right to a house, or everyone has a right to a car, or everyone has a right to a cell phone, or everyone has a right to be vaccinated or unvaccinated? Things can get really out of whack. Okay, because they've taken for themselves the ability to do something that the Constitution did not give them the ability to do. So there's no way to define that power anymore. That's what they did with Roe versus Wade. It has nothing to do with abortion itself. It could have been any topic, right? And this is where our emotions, you're going to see all this clickbait out there. Well, abortion's been overruled, or abortion has been, eliminated, and this is so wonderful, or abortion rights have been taken away. Stop yourself from getting taken by all of these emotional diatribes that the media and government are going to want to do, because what they do is they immediately turn off your logical thinking, right? You're not going to think straight. You're just going to have an emotional gut reaction without actually thinking through what the Constitution says, what our government's role is, what our state government's role is. All of these are more important, and as government's employers, we should know these things, and we should take a step back before we emotionally respond, right? We need to look at this from a clear-eyed perspective. No one should respond emotionally to anything ever, right? Make big decisions. Don't make big decisions when you're emotional. That's what we really need to be careful with here. So this has nothing to do with abortion. It has to do with the Constitution and the realms of power that exist. So what the Supreme Court did is it originally took power that it did not have and used it in an arbitrary way. And all this case did was say, hey, guess what? We don't actually have this power, and we did it wrong. We got it wrong, and the Constitution's more important. Being confined by the Constitution is more important. And that's what's beautiful about this case. And really the Constitution in general is that there still happens to be some measure of reverence and respect for the Constitution that, frankly, surprises me. To this day, it surprises me that this still exists. So that's my kind of like gut rapid reaction take on this issue. I am not going to get into my thoughts and feelings on abortion itself, as I know many people are. So go check out my article on this, because I think that is going to kind of break it down even more clearly for you. But I hope this made sense, and I hope it really helps you sort of dial back on the emotional sort of reactions that I'm sure a lot of people are having, whether happy or angry. We have to slow down, and we have to be effective employers. That's the first thing we got to do, and we got to look at this through a constitutional perspective rather than a issue perspective, because we can have feelings all day on issues, but if it doesn't have to do with government, it doesn't have to do with government, right? And that's what the Constitution does. It tells us if an issue has to do with government or not. And if it does have to do with government, which level, right? So I don't know what people say in these things to get people to follow them, but keep reading my stuff. Thank you. Fight for liberty.